It is my proud privilege to extend a hearty welcome to our distinguished guest, Professor Ian MacDonald, a very distinguished academic, administrator and a distance educator, presently holding the position of Chairman of Board of Governors of Commonwealth of Learning and also President Emeritus of ARC University. We are very happy that Professor Ian is able to make it, attend this program and share his views on the role of Commonwealth of Learning, particularly in relation to empowerment of women through open and distance learning. As I said, the topic you have identified, Indira Gandhi Open University, also is very closely associated with this activity of our effort is to make this university a women-friendly university. Today's education system, the whole focus is to make it as a human-centric educational institution. Particularly in this process, women are identified as one of the special target groups of educational institutions in general and distance education institutions in particular. Indira Gandhi National Open University also has launched some of the programs specially to reach the women, maybe Women's Empowerment Program or HIV, AIDS or Family Development Programs, Human Rights Program. Under our Center for Extension Education also many activities are initiated to reach the women. This is really a challenging task in the developing countries, because in the developing countries particularly, gender equity became one of the central concerns. And in the discussions on development, this issue is one of the central areas where the focus is on how to reach women. The question of access, there are many socio-cultural constraints, there are many institutional constraints, and the effort of all these institutions is to overcome these constraints. It is also realized that probably more than the conventional system, distance education system may be able to reach large number of people in remote areas, particularly in remote areas. I think with these few observations, I take this opportunity again to welcome and request Professor Ian MacDonald to make his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Let me just say a brief word for those who may not be entirely familiar with COL, as we refer to it, the Commonwealth of Learning. This was founded in 1987 by the heads of government of the Commonwealth, who were meeting in Canada at that time, and they determined that there should be an institution of the Commonwealth and responsible to the heads of government of the Commonwealth for the purpose of promoting distance education and open learning, and in particular employing modern communications technology for the purpose of widening access to education. And this organization was created in 1988 and established in Vancouver in Canada, where it is the only official Commonwealth agency located outside London, England. And we think that is not only an element of distinction, but also a matter of symbolic importance. Our scope is indeed broad. We're concerned with distance education and open learning at all levels of the educational spectrum, primary, secondary, tertiary, non-formal and technical. And in the process, we are employing all means of educational communications, from conventional print through film, through radio, video, and of course increasingly electronic. Let me then turn now to first of all the context of the Commonwealth of Learning. Then I will describe and encapsulate some of our objectives. I'll thirdly talk about the particular sectors that we're working in, and finally refer to some future directions, all overlaid with a concern about serving girls and women. As you know, the 54 countries of the Commonwealth embrace 1/4 of the world's humanity. And it follows that a major challenge facing all member countries, rich or poor, large or south, large or small, north or south, east or west, is the continual need to prepare and maintain the preparedness of their people to access and derive social and economic benefits from this so-called global environment. And I think it's particularly important that we, at the outset, strike as an objective that globalization and the benefits that it may bring and the means that may fuel its strength and its capacity and its energy, particularly modern communications technology, that this should be for the purpose of enhancing the life of people and not for the purpose of glorifying international institutions, large corporations, and of widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Precipitated by this dynamism, the challenge for member governments of the Commonwealth is to provide opportunities to intellectually refresh their citizens regardless of gender and throughout their lifetime. And so, as I said, Commonwealth Heads of Government created CALL in 1987 for the purpose simply of widening access to education and training by open and distance learning and by drawing upon appropriate educational technologies. I think it goes without saying, and I know we would all agree, that education, formal and non-formal, has a key role to play in helping oppressed women and men to build self-esteem, to recognize their potential, and to earn respect and to resist oppression. But as well, there are more tangible benefits, one would hope, including better work opportunities, greater independence. And increased demands for access to education by girls and women are today challenging governments and educational leaders to look beyond conventional means of providing education. And this is where I think the great excitement attaches to distance education and open learning. And I would argue that even if this form of education were not comparable to conventional education, it would be preferable to having no education at all. But as you know better than I, as practitioners who are working in this field regularly, there's now mounting evidence that the new forms of education through distance education and open learning are not only matching conventional education in terms of quality, but indeed often surpassing them. And this, of course, is a tremendous source of encouragement to all of us, because it means not only in terms of numbers and quantity, but in terms of quality as well, we are in a position to build a major, to provide a major breakthrough in terms of educational needs. So let me now say a word about the objectives of the Commonwealth of Learning. I said earlier that we try to be a catalyst, but not a missionary. And in that sense, our purpose is not to attempt to impose programs or to suggest directions on our partners and the countries of the Commonwealth, but rather to work together to identify the places, the ways, and the means whereby we can fill gaps and assist in the development of indigenous capacity and indigenous programs. So at the present time, we're focusing on 5 central objectives. First, facilitating access to affordable, high-quality learning materials and resources in support of both formal and non-formal education. And again, we're all familiar with the obvious axiom that without the materials and the resources, education can be a hollow process indeed. But we're also aware that in working for the provision of materials and resources, these must respect the local, the cultural, the indigenous requirements. And so this becomes a major task for us and for all of us. Secondly, we are promoting the use of appropriate communications and information technologies for the purpose of open and distance learning. And as I said in my opening remarks, this embraces all forms of technology, from the most elementary to the most sophisticated, depending always on the circumstances for which that technology is most adaptable. And so in some instances we've had great success with radio, and more recently with the wind-up radio, and even more recently with what we refer to as the suitcase radio, whereby people have virtually in hand the capacity to harness educational programs in that mode. Thirdly, providing academic and professional services, including credit assessment and accumulation, quality assurance, research, evaluation and review, and access to training. And here we have discovered, not surprisingly, that as distance education and open learning proliferates throughout the Commonwealth, so too does the concomitant responsibility for quality assessment and evaluation, and access for people to training so that they can play a part in that quality evaluation and assessment. And I would predict that this will become a major part of our work and your work and the work of all of us who are together in this field of education. Fourth, supplying information and advice on distance learning systems, programs, and technologies, both to practitioners and developers alike. And this is the essence of our catalyst role. Obviously, as a relatively small organization with a huge constituency, the 54 countries of the Commonwealth, we cannot pretend to do everything alone. What we try to do is to assist with institution building, capacity building, and to work in providing expert advice where possible. And finally, and fifthly, advocating the use of distance education and open learning as an effective means of improving access to education at all levels. Frequently, ministers of the governments and other public figures come to us often in despair, saying, how can we possibly leap forward in terms of meeting our needs and enhancing access to education? And although we're aware that this is not a process that is easy to establish, and we're aware that it's not one without great startup costs, nonetheless, the potential for payoff is something we can demonstrate, and increasingly we're being called upon by ministries of education throughout the Commonwealth to assist them in establishing nationwide distance education and open learning. And incidentally, I was intrigued to discover recently that the Minister of Education in Tanzania is himself pursuing a degree through the Open University in his country, so presumably that ministry also has the advantage of instant evaluation and assessment. From those objectives, how are we doing? What are we doing? And in what way are we doing it? And that brings me to the third topic, which is the sectors in which we are working. In working to achieve these objectives that I've described, we have been putting greater emphasis on other sectors in addition to tertiary education. When the Commonwealth of Learning was established in 1987, I know it was envisaged that it would be predominantly working with universities and with tertiary education. I think this was not to imply that this sector was more important than others, or the only one that was capable of adaptation to this form of education. I think it so happened that those who were involved in the creation of the institution were particularly mindful of that area and wanted to begin there, and so we did, and it continues to be important to us. But I want to emphasize that as a matter of policy of the Board of Governors, we are increasingly turning our attention to 5 other areas as well. Open schooling, which I know is a topic of great interest and importance in India. Open schooling especially to improve access to education for girls and women. Then secondly, technical vocational education and training in recognition of the needs of the workforce. Thirdly, non-formal education and training. Fourthly, continuing and professional education. And last but not least, teacher education, the foundation stone, of course, upon which all of this must rest. And we are attempting to keep all of those priorities in motion and to learn as well as we can what we can adapt from one section to another. And so programs to improve conditions for women and children have received priority through the development and implementation of appropriate distance education materials, particularly in supporting basic education. And as I say, efforts in this area have focused on open schooling, non-formal education, and teacher education, such as the following. First of all, encouraging the development of open schooling systems. And we've done that through collaboration with UNICEF, UNESCO, and local institutions, and by convening regional workshops in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, as well as a national workshop and an international symposium in India on the potential of open schooling for increasing access to education for girls and women. The purpose was to develop improved frameworks for using open schooling to increase access to basic education. Another example has been working recently with the Bangladesh Open University to develop a pilot program to increase the business skills of women, rural women, and to encourage them to become self-employed. And this has been particularly encouraging, and I believe will be particularly fruitful as we move ahead. Similarly, we are working with 8 Southern African countries to upgrade teachers of upper primary and junior secondary science, mathematics, and technology, as well as general education, using distance education as an integral component of CAL's focus on improving basic education. We are also coordinating a materials development and training initiative in Southern Africa to provide a suite of high-quality learning materials comprising the core curriculum at the junior secondary level, common to the 9 countries involved. And this, of course, is a very complicated process, first of all sifting out the common denominators of the 9 countries, and then reconditioning it, so to speak, to apply to the needs of the individual countries. In conjunction with Domasi College and the Malawi Ministry of Education, we're developing materials to professionally upgrade 3,500 teachers currently teaching without the requisite training. And as one can imagine, to make that kind of leap for 3,500 teachers to upgrade their skills is an activity with immense potential for payoff and returns. In agriculture, we're collaborating with international and national agricultural research institutions, extension partners, and non-governmental organizations, and as well with the Bangladesh Open University to develop a pilot program that will increase the business skills of rural women and encourage them to become self-employed. With assistance from CALL, we are enabling the Women's International Network, with the acronym WIN, W-I-N, to publish a book on how women can use technologies for open and distance learning. We carried out an environmental scan on the literature and barriers encountered by women in accessing the new information and communications technologies, and that scan identified challenging issues on a regional basis. We then followed that by initiating regional meetings to discuss regionally specific issues and to identify strategies to address them. 3 of the 4 planned meetings have been held now in New Delhi in November 1998 in conjunction with the British Council, in Barbados in November 1999, and Tanzania in March 2000, with support from Canada's International Development Research Centre. And a 4th meeting is planned for the South Pacific later this year. Development and implementation of a web-based database on gender-related training materials will shortly become available within the UN system and the Commonwealth Secretariat. And for that purpose, the steering committee is composed of representatives from 3 UN agencies, UNICEF, UNIFEM, and UNDP. And interesting to note that this database will be directly accessible through the UN Women's Watch website, the UN Internet Gateway on the Advancement of Women, in conjunction with the Best Practices website and the Commonwealth websites. And the main purpose of all of that is to organize gender training materials into a readily accessible resource that provides useful and strategic links to agencies and materials. And we've undertaken the design and implementation of this project, which will be demonstrated at the Beijing +5 special meetings in New York in June of this year. Your own Indira Gandhi National Open University and CALL are working together on a project involving the local development and sharing of materials in subject areas of interest to and targeted at rural women. And once the materials production process is complete, women staff from other open universities in the region broadly defined, will be invited to a workshop to review those materials with a view to adapting them and using them in their own institution. We also have a special provision in our budget to support women colleagues from across the Commonwealth seeking funds to participate in distance education, focused conferences, and meetings. And under this provision, for example, colleagues from the South Pacific, India, and the Caribbean have attended various meetings. Our own CALL-based Pan-Commonwealth Forum in Brunei in February 1999 also had a very high level of participation by women from across the Commonwealth, supported by us in that fashion. And so the need to increase literacy levels, particularly among girls and women, remains one of the preeminent educational challenges facing developing Commonwealth nations. Another program supported by the UK Department for International Development has undertaken the development of a pilot project in select Commonwealth countries to explore ways in which literacy programs can be enhanced through applications of information and communications technology. And again, you'll be interested to know that that project is currently underway in India and in Zambia. And its goal is to demonstrate and to evaluate the effectiveness of technology-based community learning centers through which literacy workers can develop learner competencies in reading, numeracy, and in the use and operation of information and communication tools. As we look ahead for the period 2000 to 2003, which is our next 3-year plan, which will be presented for approval at the 14th Commonwealth Conference of Education Ministers to meet in Halifax, Canada in November 2000, we are looking at some particularly significant initiatives. One will be to facilitate strategic alliances among content and program developers in a number of areas which target marginalized people such as girls and women, refugees, AIDS orphans, and others. We want to develop entrepreneurial skills for people, especially women living in rural areas with scant literacy skills, by building on a model which we developed in Bangladesh and are currently applying in Mozambique and will eventually be available to other regions and countries of the Commonwealth. We are developing in conjunction with the World Educational Television Authority, development agencies, and local partners a series of television programs to create awareness of legal rights of women. Legal rights in marriage, in family, property rights, rights against harassment and discrimination for use first in the subcontinent. We are developing a program to teach media skills, specifically how to develop training videos for women in Ghana employed in the agro-food processing industry. We are developing materials on open and distance learning in conjunction with the Education Department in KwaZulu-Natal, the Republic of South Africa, for women managers in education, to design an educational management and professional development training program for women empowerment and capacity building for women managers. And of course, and this I think is a good note upon which to end these formal remarks, we will continue the Rajiv Gandhi Scholarship Scheme, a program in which women were well represented in the first presentation, and it's anticipated that the same will be true in the second. Certainly we will ensure a gender balance in the selection of scholarship recipients.
Thank Professor Ian MacDonald for his very comprehensive view of role of Commonwealth of Learning.